Hello everyone. So in this video we are going to cover Office of Vice President. Prior to this we already have covered Office of President. So make sure before watching this lecture you make sure that you watch the 3 videos related to President, because while discussing this chapter we'll do a comparative analysis between Presidential Office and Vice President Office. Like we'll be discussing, when we'll discuss eligibility criteria for Vice President, we'll also discuss that what was the eligibility criteria for President's Office. When we'll discuss the election method of Vice President, then again we'll do a comparative analysis. That's why I'm suggesting that you do go through those 3 lectures that will entail around 3 or 3.5 hours, and thereafter you would be able to appreciate Vice President. One more information prior to starting this lecture: we have kept center-state relation. Many parents keep asking that why you have kept the center-state relation pending. The answer is that we'll cover that chapter. That chapter has been kept deliberately pending because we have planned to cover that chapter only after we have covered President, only after we have covered emergency, only after we have covered governor, because these 3 chapters has wide over linkages with center state relation. Unless we understand the recommendation working and loopholes in the functioning of governor, in the functioning how this president office function, what is the improvement that is needed in president, what is presidential discretionary power, what is governor's discretion. So unless we have understanding over all those things, we cannot appreciate the recommendation of Sarkaria Commission, the recommendation that is in center state relation on ARC, Administrative Reform Commission, right? So in order to appreciate the recommendation by various committees and commission that center state relation has, it is very necessary that we do understand governor's functioning, that we do understand president's functioning, how president's office has evolved over a period of time, over a period of 72 or 73 years of independence. What has been the cases of misuse of Article 356, that we'll develop understanding once we have covered this emergency provision, and that's why that chapter has been kept pending. So rest assured we'll cover that chapter as well. Coming back to this Vice President chapter, let us move to the next slide and let us discuss that how many legs we have divided this chapter into. So these are the 5 legs that we have divided this lecture into. So in first leg we'll cover the structure of union government. The structure of union government we have covered in the presidential lecture as well, but as a measure of revision, because structure of union government you have everything. You have a union executive, you have union legislature, you have union judiciary, you have comptroller and auditor general. So unless we complete all these parts, we'll keep revising. So this will be common thread. This structure of union government will remain common thread until Supreme Court, right? Thereafter functions of Vice President, and then we'll compare functions of Vice President with presidential function. Comparative study, I already told you that we'll do a comparative study of Vice President's office vis-a-vis President. So when we'll discuss eligibility criteria, oath, election, removal process, then we'll do comparison with the presidential impeachment, presidential eligibility criteria. Then we'll discuss that yes, what is the eligibility criteria, election means. This chapter is not going to be as lengthy as your president was. This chapter will hardly entail 30 or 35 minutes. Again, I cannot declare unless this recording completes that okay how much time it will take. And in the last leg I suppose you to attempt MCQs. There are very few students, and I have to tell you on record that only 6 or 7 students that I see regularly and sincerely attempting all the MCQs. My purpose of putting MCQs is just to generate a sense of competitiveness in you, and unless you you can do it at your own as well, but as soon you put your answers in public platform, a sense of competition awakens in your mind, and that sense of competition ensures that you continuously try to improve yourself. And that's why I encourage you to publicly post your answers, so that when you see, oh, that girl had last time attempted 8 questions, this time I have to attempt 9 questions, this time I have to attempt all the 10 of 10 questions. So that sense of competition does not develop in you. You won't be able to continuously improve yourself, and that's why this provision of MCQ. Let us move to the first leg of this lecture, and that is structure of union government. So if you see, union government is spread from Article 52 to Article 151. It means 99 articles are dedicated to the union government. We are just doing this as a revision measure. So this union government has been divided into 5 chapters, chapter 1 to chapter 5. The first chapter is dealing with union executive. Let us revise it with me. I'll keep taking pause so that you can remember it at yourself. So chapter 1 was dealing with Union Executive, you need not to look at screen. Chapter 2 is dealing with Union Legislature. Chapter 3 is dealing with Ordinance Making Power. Chapter 4 is dealing with Union Judiciary, and Chapter 5 is dealing with CAG, right? 4 articles are dedicated to CAG, right? 148 to 151, right? Union Executive has been divided further into, broken into these 4 parts. The first part is President and Vice President. President we already have covered, right? Right now we are in Vice President. Then Council of Ministers, 2 articles are dedicated, 74 and 75. Attorney General of India has been dedicated just 1 article, his appointment, appointing authorities and all those parts. Then Conduct of Business, 2 articles has been dedicated. Right now we are here, somewhere here. Then in next two chapter we'll cover Prime Minister and Council of Minister, and in the same Council of Minister and Prime Minister will cover this article, this portion as well. And in the third chapter we'll cover Attorney General of India, and with completion of Attorney General of India, our Union Executive will be over, and then we'll delve into Parliament chapter according to the Laxmikant, and that will be called Union Legislature, right? This ordinance power of President we already have done along with this chapter, right? So we need not to do this. Union Judiciary, when we'll complete Supreme Court, our Union Judiciary will be over, and CAG is a small chapter, you need to. So the 2 major pending chapter and big chapters are this Union Legislature, that is Parliament, and Supreme Court. So most of the question, as I already told you, from this section comes either from your President chapter, or the Cabinet, Prime Minister, or this Parliament, or this what you call Supreme Court. So these 4 or 5 chapters out of, although every chapter is equally important, but when we do cost benefit analysis, these 4 or 5 chapter of this part 3 of Laxmikant is more important than others, right? Now, having discussed this union government structure, let us delve into the second leg of this chapter, and let us discuss the Vice President. So see, the functions of the Vice President that we'll discuss in the next slide is not as widespread as we had presidential function, because president is nominal head of our country, and his functions will be more widespread when compared to vice president. So vice president, you will see in the next slide we'll discuss, his function is limited only to 2 roles, and that we'll discuss only in next slide. So in order here, this vice president office is second highest office after the president. Let us discuss this order of precedence. So this order of precedence, although constitutionally speaking, does not have much value in day-to-day administration, day-to-day governance, but it is just a protocol list, right? So in this protocol list, if you see, president comes on the first number, you have vice president office, that comes on second number, thereafter you have prime minister, thereafter you have governor, then former president, and thereafter you have deputy prime minister. Chief of Justice of India and Lok Sabha speaker has been collectively put on this 6th number, and on 7th number you have cabinet ministers, chief minister of other state, deputy chairman planning commission the office has been abolished, disbanded, then former prime minister, and then opposition leader of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Surprisingly, the holders of Bharat Ratna decorations comes at 7th number, above this Supreme Court judge and UPSC chairman, chief election. So these holders of Bharat Ratna like Sachin Tendulkar, CNR Rao, those people in this list, in this order of precedence, lies above to these judges of Supreme Court, chairperson of UPSC member, chief election commissioner, or deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha, or deputy speaker of Lok Sabha. So just although from prelim point of view it does hold importance, but you need not to emphasize much enough on this list. Just go through once, because whenever if there is any question is framed on this list, right, order would be asked, that who lies above, who lies on 7th number, who lies on 6th, and so ordering would be done, right? So once you have gone through this list, you would be able to eliminate that. So no need to spend much time on this. Let us directly delve into next slide, and let us discuss the role and functions of vice president. So if you see, vice president for the first time has been discussed in Indian Constitution in Article 63, and Article 63 about vice president, it says that there shall be a vice president of India. Similar statement we had read in Article 52 as well, where Article 52 had told us that there shall be a president of India. So president has been discussed in Article 52, right? Just a moment, this pen is not working properly, right, because the wall mount is not available. So president has been discussed in article 52, and article 63 there shall be a vice president. So 11, difference of 11 articles, if you can manage, if you can remember well enough. If you cannot remember, then nothing can be done, although these articles are not much important, but if you can remember, again you can take edge on others. Office of vice president and its functions has been borrowed from what you call United States of America. If you do not want to use the borrow word, right, if you want to be more positive, right, then you can say that this office of vice president we have inspired from United States of America, and it is these kind of positive words that you should be writing in mains, right? Because whenever you say you use the word like borrow, it gives a negative connotation, that borrowing has a negative connotation, right? So these kind of changes if you keep doing, and it will develop automatically with you guys, that you will start understanding the undertones that a word has, right? So borrowing, as I told you, that borrowing has a negative connotation, and this is inspired, although both the words deliver same meaning, but it has a positive connotation, right? Coming back to this lecture, let us move to the next slide and now discuss the role and functions of vice president. So let me get off the screen so that you can read it, and thereafter, so assuming that you would have read it by pausing the video, allow me to read this. So role and functions of the vice president in Indian constitution has been envisioned in article 64 and article 65. So the first major role or the first major function is that he is chairman of council of state, that is upper house, or that is Rajya Sabha. Can anybody tell that why this Rajya Sabha is called council of states? So it is called Council of State because the manner of election of its member. How do we elect Lok Sabha members? So we do directly participate in election of Lok Sabha member, that is our member of parliament. But if you see when we will discuss parliament and Rajya Sabha, right, that chapter you will see that the members of Rajya Sabha is not elected directly by the people. It is elected by the state legislative assembly, and because they are elected by state legislative assembly, that's why this Rajya Sabha or the upper house is also called Council of State. So the first function or the first role of the vice president out of two roles that I told you is that he is chairman of Council of State, and that is defined in article 64, that has been mentioned in article 64. The second major role of vice president in India's constitution or India's governance is that he acts as president in event of death of president. If president in office has died, or president has resigned, or if president has been impeached, right? So here this word, when you will get the PDF, this word will be changed, right? As of now, just consider this word as impeached, because president in India's constitution, as per India's constitution, is not removed, but he is impeached, right? So read this word as impeached. I'll correct it while providing you guys the PDF, right? So in event of death, in event of resignation, in event of impeachment of president office is vacated, and because these situations occur suddenly, right, so election will be held, election will take time, and in this event, right, vice president is asked to assume the charges of president office. So second major role is then that in case of vacancy in office of president, vice president will be considered, or vice president will assume charges of president. So the first function is chairman, and second is acting president or president. So vice president shall act as a president until new president assumes charge. And if you again, I'll relate it to the previous chapter, that in case of death, resignation, removal, election commission is generally suggested that yes, if president has been impeached or president has died, right, you should hold election within 6 months of occurrence of this resignation or death. So the maximum period in event of death, in event of resignation, or in event of impeachment, the maximum period for which vice president will be president is 6 months, right? 6 months. So the maximum period is 6 months. The other case, other situation in which vice president will assume the role of president is if president is very ill and for a longer period of time. So if it is some cough or some fever, then not in that case. But if period is longer, like if he has gone on ventilator, means it's been a month or month and a half or 15 days even, right? So that is also a considerable time considering the size of India. So in that time duration as well, although constitutionally there is no such provision that when this vice president will assume the charge, but yes, in case of illness or in case of long absence, right, vice president, and there is no provision who will decide whether Supreme Court will take call, well, whether vice president himself will take call. So there is no such provision. Constitution is silent on this area that if this office, president office, is vacated due to illness, of course that will not be vacated, it's the call that has to be taken by president itself. So Rajendra Prasad, when got ill for the first time, right, it was he who had taken the call himself, right, that vice president Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, if I could remember well. So the first vice president you had in office was Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, right. So he had assumed charge on the suggestion of president itself. So this call has to be taken by president itself, and never in the past this contention has arisen that who will take call on such issues if president is ill, whether president himself should be allowed to take the call, that whether VP will assume his charge or not, or Supreme Court will wade in. So never ever this situation has arisen. So in all these situations, in these two situations, either if he is ill or he is absent, or if he has died, resigned or impeached, so in all these situations, so in first situation this period was maximum 6 months because EC, Election Commission, has to have election within the 6 months. But in second condition, if the president is ill, so that time cannot be known, right, he can remain ill for a year, 2 years. So in that situation this period can be longer as well, although again, as I told you, that situation has never occurred. Once occurred in Rajendra Prasad, so that was a smaller period, right, it was nothing like. But yes, if we move by the logic, as I again told you, that there is no constitutional specification in this area that the maximum period in case of illness vice president can remain president for so and so years or so and so months. There is no such provision in the constitution, right. Then vice president, while acting as president, he shall have all the functions, all the immunities, all the privileges, all the powers of the president. So that's very obvious. The new additional information, because this information we had seen in the president chapter as well, the additional information is that while acting as president, so vice president, when he is in office, right, on account of impeachment, on account of resignation of president or death of, so when he is acting as president, right, vice president shall not perform the functions of the chairman. So his primary function was of a chairman, right, of the Rajya Sabha. So while he is acting as president, in event of vacancy in president office, he shall not perform the duties, the functions of the chairman of Council of State, right. So in those instances when vice president is acting as president, so deputy chairman, so in Lok Sabha you have deputy speaker along with the speaker. So in absence of speaker, deputy speaker assumes the charge of the chair. In similarly in Rajya Sabha you have something called deputy chairman, right. So deputy chairman will take care of the functions of the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So that is one additional, although he will not cease to, right, he will not cease to be chairman of the Council of State as soon he is relieved from the president office. When the new president has assumed the charge or the previous president has recovered, right, he will come on the same post. So he will not cease to be chairman of the Rajya Sabha. It's just a transient period in which he shall not perform these functions while acting as president, right. So I hope these informations would be enough about, you will have clarity on role and functions of the vice president. Let us move to the next slide and let us, so if vacancy, this is one new information, and this new information is in comparison to vice president of America. So in America, in event of death, in event of resignation, or in event of impeachment of president, right, vice president assumes the charge. But when vice president assumes the charge, vice president will assume the charge for the remainder of period, remainder of term, right. So suppose Trump is impeached right now, his pending term is 6 months, right. So election will be held in time, right? Even if it had been 2 years or 2.5 years when Trump is impeached, so Vice President, that is Mike Pence, he will assume the charge of President's office and he will remain president for those 2 or 2.5 years, whatever pending period is there, right? There the Election Commission of America is not mandated to conduct the election for within 6 months, right? So he will remain. So unlike Indian president's office, right, that mandates that elections should be conducted within 6 months, and the maximum period for which Indian vice president can assume the charge is 6 months. That is not the case in America. In America, if office of president has fallen vacant, right, vice president will serve for the remainder of period, right? So that is the difference between vice presidential power of America and vice presidential power of India, right? Election of vice president and president happens at the same time in America, because while running for the office of president itself, a candidate has to declare that who he will have vice president as well. Rather, the vice president is called president's mate, right? So president has to declare that who will his mate, right? Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss the eligibility criteria that has been mentioned in Article 66 for the vice presidential office. So if a candidate has to file nomination for the vice president's office or vice president, what eligibility criteria or what condition he needs to fulfill? If you see, if we compare the vice president eligibility criteria for vice president's office and president's office, there is huge amount of similarity, and that's what I was calling about, that we'll keep doing a comparative analysis, except one difference, and that one difference we'll see almost everything is same, right? So the first eligible, that he should be citizen of India. Of course, that's obvious in any office. When office is of such high constitutional importance, you cannot give it to citizens of any other nation. The question is that can naturalized citizen as well? The answer is yes, because in Indian Constitution, Article 66, or for that matter, while specifying eligibility criteria for president, the only line that was mentioned was that he should be citizen of India. So even naturalized citizens are also citizens of India. So naturalized citizens, it is again Supreme Court's observation that naturalized citizen as well can run for offices like important offices like president and vice president. Second criteria, that he should be of 35 years of age. That was same criteria in president's eligibility criteria section as well. He should be qualified for the election to the Rajya Sabha office, right? In the previous case, that was in president's case, it was Lok Sabha offices, right? So Lok Sabha has been stricken, right? Because for this office, that is vice presidential office, he should be qualified. He should not be member of Rajya Sabha, he should be qualified for the election of Rajya Sabha. So whatever eligibility criteria that a candidate has to fulfill to get elected to the Rajya Sabha, that condition, that all condition in addition to this 35 years of age. So do not try to connect it with what you call Rajya Sabha membership, because in Rajya Sabha the age criteria is just 30 years. Right, so that is one difference, right? So when you concentrate, the age criteria for the Rajya Sabha is 30 years, but here you do have along with 35 years, right? He should be also qualified for the election to the Rajya Sabha office. Next, he should not be holding any office of profit under Government of India or any state or any local government. So this is the third condition or third eligibility criteria that a candidate has to fulfill if he want to apply for vice presidential election. Next, nomination of a candidate means whosoever want to run for this vice presidential office must be subscribed by 20 proposers. This number in presidential office, if you remember, this number was 50. So 50 proposer for the president and 50 seconder. What is this proposer and seconder? We already had discussed in presidential office. So a person who wants to run for vice presidential office, his name or his candidature must be proposed by 20 people and must be seconded by 20 people. If I try to make you understand once again, the meaning of proposer is that suppose I recommend or I propose that person should get Bharat Ratna. Now you might say that yes, whatever I said means although I was not first to propose that that person should get Bharat Ratna, but just because I have said it, right, you support my idea, that whatever this person said, I propose or I support his idea. So you will be seconder, I'll be proposer, because I was the first who proposed this idea that he should get Bharat Ratna. So that is the difference between proposer and seconder. So the candidature of a candidate, right, must be proposed by 20 MP, member of parliament, and that must be seconded as well by 20 MP. Then only that candidate can be eligible to file or can run for vice presidential office. Proposer of one candidate cannot be proposer for another candidate. So suppose I as a member of parliament have is proposer, one of the proposer of a candidate A, then I cannot be proposer of candidate B as well, right? So that's a logical thing. So that was about eligibility criteria for the presidential office that has been mentioned in Article 66. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss that how elections are held. Okay. Now what is this? So offices exempted from office of profit for the vice presidential election. So these 4 offices, or rather 5 offices: office of president, office of governor, office of vice president, and union and state council of minister. So if you are any of them, if you are president, if one is vice president, or if one is governor, or if one is part of union council of minister, or if one is part of state council of minister, these post, these designation will be exempted from office of profit definition, right? This office of profit definition, what did we say? That should not be holding office of profit under government of India, while these offices are under government of India. So these people may be ineligible, but in office of profit definition for vice president, right, it was clearly mentioned that these 4 or 5 offices will remain exempted from this office of profit definition. Means these people, so somebody, if Ramnath Kovind tomorrow wants to contest election while being president for this vice president, he can well do so, right? If vice president, that is Venkaiah Naidu ji, tomorrow seeks re-election, he will be eligible. His office will not come under the definition of office of profit, right? If governor of any state want to run for the vice presidential election, he can well do so. His office again is exempted from this office of profit definition, because any of the offices, if fall within the office of profit definition, that office or that person who is holding that office will not be eligible under Article 66 to run for the vice presidential election. I hope this eligibility criteria section is clear to you. Now let us move to the next slide and let us discuss election of vice president, right? So if you remember, who were the electoral college, right? Electoral college of vice president has been mentioned in Article 66. The meaning of electoral college is that who are the voters, right? Who all will participate in the election of vice president. So let us do a comparative analysis. If you could remember from the last lecture, what was the electoral college for the presidential election? So this was the electoral college. This was the electoral college for the presidential election. So you had elected members of the Lok Sabha, you had elected members of the Rajya Sabha, you had elected members from the state assemblies, you had elected members from NCT, Delhi and Puducherry, right? These people, nominated members, were not allowed to vote in presidential election, and the logic was that if nominated members, because the nominated members have been nominated by president itself, and if those nominated members in the Rajya Sabha, there are 12 members nominated by president himself, right, in Rajya Sabha, and 2 members from the Anglo-Indian community until now, right, that provision has been abolished. So 12 members in the Rajya Sabha, 2 members in the Lok Sabha until now had been nominated in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha by the president. So if those nominated members are allowed to vote in presidential election, that will create a kind of conflict, and that's why nominated members are not allowed to be part of presidential election. A member of legislative council are also not allowed to be part of presidential election. So now, since we have recalled who all are the part of electoral college for presidential election, right, who all are part of electoral college for presidential election, let us see who all are part of electoral college for the vice presidential election. So all member of Lok Sabha and all member of Rajya Sabha. The key word is that all members. Just a moment. So the key word is that all the members of Lok Sabha and all the members of Rajya Sabha. Here in presidential election, only elected members were forming the part of the electoral college, right? Here all the members. Why all the members are part of this electoral college for vice president? Because here the conflict of interest does not arise. The nominated member in Lok Sabha and the nominated members in Rajya Sabha has been nominated by president and not by the vice president. So that concept of conflict of interest that was arising in president case, that is not arising here, right? And that's why all members of Lok Sabha and all members of Rajya Sabha has been allowed to participate in the election of vice president. The next question that you should be raising is that why these elected members of state assembly has been not allowed in this vice presidential election. So let us try to understand. When we were voting, when these people were voting for the election of president, all the union's executive power is vested in president, right? We call Indian president as titular head, we call him nominal head, so he is something symbolic head of India. That is not the case with vice president, and that's why it is not necessary that all these members of the state as well does participate in the election of vice president. So the settled point is that the electoral college, all members of Lok Sabha, all members of Rajya Sabha will participate in the electoral college for the vice president. The method of election will remain same. The method of election will be indirect, right, as was in case of president, indirect election, and the method will remain proportional representation by single transferable vote. So same method. Whip again is not issued during the vice presidential election. This was the same case in presidential election. Why whip is not issued in president's election and vice president election? That logic had already been explained. In presidential election, thereafter elections shall be held by secret ballot. So why not open ballot? That concept again we have declared in presidential election. So almost everything is same except the electoral college. So let us recall it. In presidential election, elected members of Lok Sabha, elected members of Rajya Sabha, elected members of the State Assembly, elected members of State Assembly of NCT of Delhi and Puducherry were participating. So this was the electoral college for presidential election. The electoral college for vice presidential election is that all members of Lok Sabha and all members of Rajya Sabha, rest other information, be it election method or be it regarding whip or be it regarding secret ballot, right, rest provisions in comparison to president is same. So I hope this comparative analysis of presidential election and vice presidential election would be clear to you. Let us raise two questions. Why nominated members participate in VP's election and they do not participate in what you call presidential election? So we already have replied to that question, that in this case, when nominated members participate in election of vice president, that does not create conflict of interest. But in this case, when nominated members, if allowed to participate in presidential election, that would have created what you call conflict of interest. Why MLAs have no participation in vice presidential election? So that point we have explained, because in presidential election they were participating, these people were participating because president is national head, right? He is symbolic, he is titular head, but that is not the case with vice president. When we were discussing role and functions of the vice president, it was very clear that most of the time he is nothing but chairman of Rajya Sabha, chairman of a house, right? And you cannot expect that in a election of chairman of a house, whole of state can be involved, and that's why MLAs do not participate. MLAs who participate in the election of president, they people do not participate in the election of vice president. So I hope this election method would be clear to you. Let us move to the next slide and let us raise this question, whether election of a vice president can be challenged into the court or not. So yes, it can be challenged as per Article 71, right? ECI, that is Election Commission of India, conducts the election of the president as well and vice president as well. If there is any election dispute regarding the election of vice president, judgment will be delivered by Supreme Court and its decision would be final. There is no appellate body after the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction over the disputes in the election of vice president and president, right? So that is a similar provision that we had in presidential election as well. There as well, Supreme Court alone had right, means Supreme Court has exclusive and original jurisdiction. What is this exclusive and original jurisdiction? We'll study in Supreme Court's chapter, right? If anybody of you know, right, that's good. Election of vice president shall not be called into the question on the grounds that there was any vacancy in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So suppose any of the member was not present, or if 2 or 3 members in Lok Sabha has resigned, so for those posts in those constituency, election has to be held within 1 month. Or suppose there is vacancy, 2-3 vacancy in Rajya Sabha, so you cannot cite the ground that we should have waited for 1 month or 1.5 months, let this election happen, thereafter we would have full membership, then this electoral college would have been more representative. So on those grounds, election of vice president cannot be called into Supreme Court, and you cannot challenge on these grounds that okay, let us raise this dispute, right? If election of vice president, so if this case is dragged into Supreme Court, election of any candidate, he has been declared winner, and if his election is dragged into Supreme Court, right, and if Supreme Court finds that yes, whatever charges that has been, suppose electoral malpractices charges has been leveled in Supreme Court by another contestant, right, that he or she person, that person who has been declared winner has been indulging in electoral malpractices, and Supreme Court finds that charges true, and if Supreme Court decide to declare his election void, in that case, suppose for after 10 days of election, or after 15 days of election, or after 15 days of assuming the charge, if vice president who has already entered in the office, his election is declared void by the Supreme Court, any of the acts, any of the work that he has done, right, that will not be invalidated, right? So that is the one provision regarding this dispute, right? I hope this election dispute that has been dealt in Indian Constitution in Article 71 would be clear to you. Let us move to the next slide and now discuss the term and re-election. So term and re-election, as far as concerned, in comparative analysis you will find that the term of office of president is also 5 years and term of office of vice president is also 5 years, and his 5 years will be calculated not from the date of election but from the date he assumes the charge of the office of vice president, right? He can seek re-election any number of times. So in past you had recently Hamid Ansari, the previous vice president, and the first vice president, that was Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, right? He held this vice presidentship twice, right? So the first and second vice president was Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. He had got this Bharat Ratna award as well. So these two vice president had held this vice president office twice, right? So you can seek number of election any number of time, and the term of office would be 5 years. I hope this term and re-election would be clear to you. So he is this is additional information. So he is Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, whose birthday we celebrate as Teachers Day, 5th September. Do you remember that? Right. So this is one additional information. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss that how this vice president is removed, right? So in case of president, the word used was that impeachment, right? But here in this case, for the removal of vice president, you need not to have any formal impeachment process. Two method, either he can resign by writing to president. In president case, who he was writing letter to if he had to resign? So if president has to resign, he will write letter to vice president, resignation letter would be addressed to vice president, and if vice president has to resign, he will address his letter to president. So that is a vice versa case, and that's why these two arrows, that president will address his letter to vice president his letter to president. So first method is that he can resign, right? The second is that if removal, in case of removal, what would be the ground of removal? Violation of constitution? No, violation of constitution was the ground for the impeachment of president. As far as removal of vice president is concerned, constitution is silent on the grounds. There is no grounds mentioned in the constitution. So what can be done? So Rajya Sabha, if they want to remove their chairman, because vice president is their chairman as well. So if Rajya Sabha decides to remove their chairman for any biasness or any ground, right, they can initiate a resolution in Rajya Sabha. So in president case, if we do comparison, in president case, the resolution for impeachment could have been initiated in Lok Sabha as well and in Rajya Sabha as well. But here in this case, for the removal of vice president, that resolution can be initiated in Rajya Sabha alone, because he is chairman of Rajya Sabha only, right? So for the speaker's removal, let us do a comparative analysis. What Lok Sabha can do for its speaker's removal. So for the speaker's removal, if you see, speaker can be removed, speaker of Lok Sabha can be removed by a resolution that is passed by the effective majority in Lok Sabha itself. So when you are removing, when Lok Sabha a speaker has to be removed, resolution will be moved in what you call Lok Sabha itself, and if Lok Sabha passes by a effective majority, right, then the speaker stands removed, right? So similarly, if Rajya Sabha has to remove its chairman, the resolution will be initiated only in Rajya Sabha and not in Lok Sabha. It's obvious, right? While comparing it with the president's impeachment, president impeachment could have been initiated in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as well. Now come back to the vice president's removal. So once Rajya Sabha passes such resolution by effective majority, right, not by special majority. This special majority was in case with presidential impeachment, right? Although Laxmikant has used this word special majority in case of removal of vice president as well, but that information is incorrect, mind you. So when you are reading Laxmikant, keep your eyes open. In respect to vice presidential removal as well, Laxmikant has used this special majority, but the majority that is used for the removal of vice president in Rajya Sabha, that majority is effective majority, right? I hope you know the difference between absolute majority, effective majority, simple majority and special majority. These all kind of majority has been discussed in amendment chapter very well. If you don't know, you can get that information in iCard, right? यहाँ एक information flash हो जाएगी अगर वो video आप देख लेते हो, right? So you can know that what is the difference between absolute majority, what is the difference between simple and then effective majority. So removal of, again I am repeating, the removal resolution for the removal of vice president can be initiated only in Rajya Sabha. In president's case, the impeachment resolution could have been initiated in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha both, but here only in Rajya Sabha and not by special majority but by effective majority. Once this resolution has been passed in Rajya Sabha by effective majority, this resolution will go into the Lok Sabha, right? And if Lok Sabha agrees to it, what is the meaning of agrees to it? Just a moment. So what is the meaning of agrees to it? So the meaning of agrees to it is simple majority. So if Lok Sabha as well passes this resolution for the removal of vice president, right, by simple majority, then this person, that vice president, will stand removed from the day Lok Sabha passes this with simple majority. But caveat is that the 14 days prior information, prior notice must be served to vice president if Rajya Sabha intends to move any such resolution for the removal of vice president, right? I hope this provision is clear to you. Lok Sabha agrees to it means simple majority, right? I hope these things would be clear to you. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss that what will happen if vacancy is created in the office of vice president. So vacancy can be created, vacancy can happen in vice president office by two reasons, either due to expiry of reason or either collectively due to any of these reasons, right? Either due to death or resignation or removal. If the vacancy in the vice president office has been created due to expiry of term, which is a known event, so if previous vice president has assumed charge in 2017, he'll of course retire in 2021. So in these events, ECI is always prepared and they conduct election in a manner that you have a new vice president in time to assume the charge before the incumbent leaves the office, right? So election to the vice president office shall be completed before the expiration of incumbent vice president, because this is something that you already know. Election Commission already know that in January 2022 Venkaiah Naidu's term has to expire. So before that you will have another what you call vice president. If election, so in case due to any circumstances, so right now the election to the Legislative Council of Maharashtra was withheld because of this corona crisis. So if there is any event due to which election cannot be conducted to this vice president office in time by Election Commission of India, in that case current incumbent, that is Venkaiah Naidu ji, or for that matter any person, that incumbent will be asked to continue his office beyond 5 years as well. So if election cannot be held, incumbent should extend until next vice president assumes the charge. So all these things are similar to the presidential provisions, right? So in president election as well, if on the expiry of term, if election could not have happened in time, then the incumbent president could have been called to continue the office beyond 5 years. But if vacancy has been created by any of these events, if vice president unfortunately dies in the office, or if he has resigned, or if he has been removed, so these all will be sudden events, and in these events ECI, that is responsible for holding election, they cannot, ECI conduct, they are not gods, right? They cannot predict the death of any person, right? If resignation, in case of resignation, you cannot ask vice president, no, you continue this office until we have this election, you cannot say, right? Or if a vice president has been removed, in that case as well, you cannot say, oh, we need 1 month time for the election, and because this vacancy cannot be created, so you please continue for another 1 month, even if we have removed you from the office. So these all incidences will be sudden, and in that case Election Commission should hold election within 6 months. No, Election Commission in this case of vice president's post election, the provision is that election should be held within not 6 months but as soon as possible. This within 6 months provision was there in presidential election, but in this case, that is vice presidential election, that is mentioned in Article 68, the election should be held as soon as possible. There is no such provision called 6 months that was present in presidential election. Person elected to fill the vacancy should be elected for the full 5 year of term and not for the remainder of period. So if person has been elected after the death or after resignation, or if for after the removal, right, that person will be elected for the full 5 years, not for 2 or 2.5 years that is remaining from the previous vice president. So I hope this provision is also clear to you, right? Constitution is silent on who shall be vice president in case vacancy is created. So if you remember, in president office, if vacancy has been created either due to death or resignation or removal, there was a sequence, right? First, vice president will assume the charge of president office. If vice president is not available, then Supreme Court CGI, Supreme Court CGI, Chief Justice of India, is also not available, then senior most judge. So there was a sequence. But Constitution, in event of death of vice president, in an event of resignation of vice president, in case of removal of vice president, there would be a gap of 2 months or 3 months or 1 month, whatever time Election Commission will take in conducting election and having a new vice president. So whatever time this vice president office will remain vacant, right, Constitution is silent that who will assume the charge. And perhaps the reason could be that vice president's function is not as much extensive as president. So vice president role was only to the extent of chairman of the house, and you already have a deputy chairman who can assume, in absence of vice president, he can assume the charges of Rajya Sabha, and that's why perhaps Constitution is silent on who should be vice president in case vacancy is created in his office, because deputy chairman from the Rajya Sabha is available, right? He can assume the charge of chairman, he can run the house. That's why perhaps Constitution is silent. Let us move to the next slide. So all this information, vacancy and time of holding election, we already have seen in the previous slide. This has just been provided in text format. This will remain available in PDF. You can read it, right? All these explanation we already have done, right? Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss oath of vice president that has been discussed in Article 69. So oath to the office of vice president has not been mentioned in third schedule, right? As soon you hear the oath or as soon you hear the emolument, for the emolument you directly jump to the second schedule, because most of the constitutional functionaries like union minister, president, right, their emolument has been mentioned in second schedule. As far as oath is concerned, oath of the most of the constitutional functionaries has been mentioned in third schedule. So directly our minds jump that okay, if we are talking about oath of the president and if we are talking about oath of the vice president, that would be mentioned in third schedule, but that is not the case. That is a caution that I had provided in presidential oath as well, and the same caution I am providing in vice presidential oath as well, that their oath, that is vice president's oath and president's oath, is mentioned not in third schedule but in article. So vice president's oath has been mentioned in article 69, right? Let us see that थर्ड schedule में किस किस का oath जो है वो mention है. So in third schedule, union and state council of minister, MLAs, MPs और MLAs, MP के कैंडिडेट जो कि मतलब कंटेस्ट करने के लिए खड़े हो रहे हैं, और जजेस का ओथ, इन सब का ओथ जो है थर्ड स्केड्यूल में मेंशन है. प्रेसिडेंट का ओथ एंड इनका गवर्नर का ओथ या फिर वाइस प्रेसिडेंट का ओथ डायरेक्टली आर्टिकल्स में मेंशन है, ना कि थर्ड स्केड्यूल में. ये चीज़ मैंने क्यों डाली है, बिकॉज जैसे ही बोलते हैं कि भाई ओथ कहाँ मेंशन है, ओथ के लिए हमारा माइंड जंप होता है. हमने हमेशा पॉलिटी में याद किया कि ओथ इज मेंशनड इन थर्ड स्केड्यूल, बट here the differentiation is that oath of governor, oath of vice president and oath of president is directly mentioned in constitutional articles, and that's why you do have image, right? Now who administers the oath of vice president? So a president directly will administer oath of vice president, or some person appointed by him, generally Supreme Court CGI in his absence, will administer oath to the vice president. What will be the content of that oath? This will be content. So this could be the content of oath: preserve, protect and defend the constitution and law of the land. The answer is no, this can't be the content. This was the content of presidential oath. He will vice president has different content for the oath, and his content is two, right? So true faith and allegiance to the constitution of India and faithfully discharge the duties of the office that I am entering into. So this content of the oath of vice president is similar to the content of oath of member of parliament. True faith and allegiance to the constitution of India, this oath that we saw, right, just a moment, preserve, protect and defend the constitution and law of the land, this is the content of oath of governor and president alone. As far as vice president is concerned, these two lines are the content of oath: true faith and allegiance to the constitution of India and faithfully discharge the duties of the office I am entering into. As I told that this is same oath that is administered by member of parliament as well. So with this we are wrapping up this vice presidential chapter. These are 6 MCQ that we have put up, right? So first MCQ, second MCQ, third MCQ, fourth MCQ, fifth MCQ and the sixth MCQ. So these are, oh, Prime Minister content is also ready, right? So